The Gospel of John is a coded book, and in this video, we will show you how you can decode it for yourself. Welcome to the Christian Kabbalah channel. I'm so happy you're here. I can tell you that the first time that I read that the Gospel of John was coded, I was shocked. But the more I looked into it, the more it was revealed to me that the Gospel of John is actually a Kabbalistic text that reveals a pathway to draw closer and closer to God. Though this message might be new to you and was certainly new to me, it is not the first time that other authors have suggested that the Gospel of John contains hidden secrets. The first time I read about it was by an author named Ouspensky, who wrote this. The four Gospels are written for the few, for the very few, for the pupils of esoteric schools. However intelligent and educated in the ordinary sense a man may be, he will not understand the Gospels without special indications and without special esoteric knowledge. Now, I am not a member of Ouspensky's so-called inner circle, but I am a student of Kabbalah. Now, it's only been in the last 50 years or so that Kabbalah has been brought and revealed to the world. For thousands of years, up until only 50 years ago, Kabbalah was an esoteric knowledge. It was available to only the few. In the 1970s, Kabbalah was brought to the world by my teachers, the Rav and Karen Berg. And since then, what had been an esoteric study is now available to all. In the same way that Kabbalah was hidden for so long, the hidden messages of the Gospel of John have also been hidden. And when we decode the messages, we find that the spiritual secrets that the Gospel of John talks about are identical to Kabbalistic ideas. One of the reasons why the Gospel of John has remained hidden and secret is because there are actually two different types of texts within the Gospel itself. And these two different types of texts require us to look at the Gospel of John in two different ways. So those two types of texts are, first of all, the narration of Jesus and his actions and his life. And then secondarily, there are sections of text where Jesus is talking either to someone else, to God, or in a monologue. In order to decode the narrated parts of the text, we have to do that through the lens of Kabbalah. And what does this mean? It means that embedded in each of the different stories of Jesus are Kabbalistic symbols and tools that are used today. And if we have a working knowledge of what these symbols and tools do, we can understand the narrated aspects of the text from a different way. So in order to do this, let's look at an example. And the example that we will look at is in John 2. And it is Jesus' first miracle where he turns water into wine. Let's read that section. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there. Moreover, Jesus and his students were also called. And after having run out of wine, the mother of Jesus says to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus says to her, "What to me with you, woman? That my hour is not yet come." His mother says to the servants, "Whatever he might say to you, do." And there were 6 stone water jars, according to the purification of the Jews, standing, having space for 2 or 3 mitrate. Jesus says to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them unto the brim. And he says to them, "Draw out of them and carry them to the master of the feast." And they carried it. Moreover, when the master of the feast had tested the water after it had become wine, he did not know where it was from, but the servants knew. After he drew the water, the master of the feast calls the bridegroom and says to him, "Every man first puts on the good wine, and when they have drunk freely the lesser. You have kept the good wine until now." So traditionally, the church has read this section as a way to prove that Jesus was God. And how does the church designate Jesus as God from this section, it's relatively simple. That Jesus had the power to transform matter, right? He first started with one substance, and through his consciousness or through his miraculous abilities, he was able to transfer that into a completely different substance. And because most human beings are not able to do this, this proves, according to the church, that Jesus was God. But if we read this even without the blinders of religion, it should spark in us some questions. Like, for example, isn't it a relatively frivolous thing that Jesus, for his very first miracle, would provide wine to people who, for all intents and purposes, had seemed like they'd had a lot to drink already? That's a really odd thing for Jesus. You would think he might do something to help the poor, or to help the needy, or to help people who were sick. But no, for his first miracle, Jesus takes and gives wine to people who had already had plenty to drink. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what's up with all those details, right? Why does the text bother to tell us the volume of these stone jars? Why does the text bother to tell us that there were 6 of them? Now, there's no good answers to this, right? These seem odd details. Like, whoever wrote the text, and we're going to assume that it was inspired by God at the very least, right? Could have added other details. It could have added how many servants there were. It could have added the type of wine. There's so many other details that it could have added, but it didn't. It specifically told us the details of the stone jars, and there were 6 of them. Like, what's that all about? And why doesn't the church actually look and give us answers to these things? But that aside, let's look at this particular scene from the perspective of Kabbalah. Now, in Kabbalah, there are 3 main parts to this particular section that hold great meaning. And those 3 things are a wedding, the wine, and water. And we'll explore right now what each of those 3 things mean from a Kabbalistic perspective. Let's first look at the Kabbalistic meaning of a wedding. And what event is there in our world where there is a more complete union than on a wedding day of 2 people who love each other? And so therefore, whenever a wedding is spoken about in the Zohar, it does not represent a physical wedding between 2 people. It instead represents the complete and total union between our soul and God, or complete and total union between the upper worlds and this world. It represents union, spiritual union of spiritual light and the spiritual vessel. So wine is also an incredibly important part of Kabbalah. Wine holds within it the energy of receiving, or the energy of manifestation. It is, in fact, a symbol and a tool that is used to draw spiritual energy. What do I mean by this? So in any event, in any connection, in any type of prayer, whether it is the weekly Shabbat or Sabbath prayers, or at any major holidays, or almost any major holidays, the prayers are concluded by a leader saying a special blessing over wine, and then he drinks that wine. And the purpose of this is that throughout the entire prayers, the people who are praying are requesting and awakening certain spiritual light, spiritual light of protection, spiritual light of sustenance, spiritual light of healing, basically anything that you can imagine. The Kabbalists teach that it is first drawn down from the upper worlds, but it is done only in the form of metaphysical energy. All Kabbalistic connections, they are called, or Kabbalistic prayers, is first an awakening and a drawing down from the upper worlds, different energies, and through wine, it is actually manifested in this world. We must know that wine is an important tool of manifestation and of receiving. And lastly, let's talk about water. To any Kabbalist, water holds incredibly special place, because the internal aspect, the internal energy of water, according to Kabbalah, is that of chesed. Now, chesed is a Hebrew word that means loving kindness. Chesed, or loving kindness, according to Kabbalah, is the quality, it is a characteristic, it is an attribute of the Creator. So with the knowledge of what these 3 things mean symbolically from a Kabbalistic perspective, we can now turn our attention to the parable or to Jesus' first miracle. Before we do that though, we also need to look at one of those incredibly important details in the text. Now, when it says that the stone jars, these huge stone vessels, were 2 to 3 metrate, we must look at what 1 metrate is, if that is even the singular version of it. 1 metrate is equivalent to about 40 liters of water. And so these stone jugs were not like little things that, they weren't like a carafe. Instead, they were huge. They contained between 20 and 30 gallons of water. They were at least the size of a human being. So when we envision Jesus at this wedding and he tells the servants to bring these stone vessels, we are talking about a human-sized vessel, if not even slightly larger than that. And so now we can look at the hidden messages of this particular story. Well, first of all, we must know that the backdrop is that of spiritual unity or spiritual union. This is what the wedding represents. So when Jesus calls over the servants and tells them to fill up these huge stone jars with water, what we can assume is that they represent our spiritual vessel. In essence, without the light of the Creator, we are in essence empty stone vessels without much capability of doing anything. So what does Jesus do? He tells them to fill up these human-like stone vessels up to the brim with water. And what does water represent? It represents chesed. It represents loving kindness. So in essence, what Jesus is telling us is that when we are able to fill ourselves with loving kindness and then to draw that loving kindness out from us, right, through actions of sharing, actions of kindness, doing in essence good deeds, what inevitably that happens is that the water then turns into wine. And again, what is wine? Wine is the energy of receiving. It is the energy of manifestation. And in this case, the wine represents receiving the blessings that we want the most in life. So this gives us a roadmap as to how we can manifest the things that we want most. In essence, we fill ourselves with loving kindness and we then express that to the people around us. But there's an even curious thing, is that when the master of the feast tastes this water, he makes a curious comment. He says, "Every man first puts on the good wine, and when they have drunk freely, the lesser. You have kept the good wine until now." And what does this statement say about this energy of manifestation? It means that when we fill ourselves with goodness, we fill ourselves with kindness, and we continually express that by taking kindness out from within us and giving it to everyone around us. This is a guarantee that we will keep the blessings that we already have and to keep the things that are most sacred to us. In essence, it's a guarantee of how we can maintain our blessings. It's unfortunately a sad comment. How often in life do we receive great blessings only to see them disappear later on in life? We fall in love with the person that we think is the most amazing person ever, and then several years later, that marriage disintegrates. Or how often are we able to open a business only to find that years later that business becomes a huge burden or ends up going bankrupt? How often are we given children and we know when the children are born, they are the greatest blessings that we could possibly see, only to see that relationship disintegrate later on in life when the children become adults? What this section is telling us, which is a fundamental teaching in Kabbalah, is that we are not subjected to entropy. We're not subjected to the ways of disintegration in this world. And if we continually fill us with loving kindness, with the aspect of the Creator, of love for everyone around us, and then express that through action, this is a guarantee that we can keep our blessings. And so you see, this is just one example of how the text reveals a different meaning when we have an understanding of the Kabbalistic tools that are embedded in it. And again, this just refers to the parts of the text that are narrated. So now let's turn our attention to the parts of the text where Jesus actually speaks. When Jesus is speaking to someone else, like for example Nicodemus, or to his disciples, or making the prayer to God, it requires us to analyze and decode the text in a different way. In order to understand why we would decode the text in the way that we're going to, we first must understand that Kabbalistically, Jesus is symbolic of the soul that we have within us. According to Kabbalah, each of us is given a divine aspect from God itself. This is given to us in the form of a soul. And Kabbalah teaches that every human being, in fact, everything that exists on this planet, has a soul. And what is that soul? It is God. It is the pure aspect, which is our purest essence. Jesus represents our soul. Jesus is our soul. And so therefore, anytime Jesus is speaking, we can also assume that it is our purest essence that is also speaking. So with this in mind, we can then turn to decoding the text. Whenever Jesus refers to himself as I, we can change those words to make it our soul speaking. Let's look at John 14:20. That verse says, "In that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." So again, because Jesus is a personification of our soul, anytime he is speaking, we can assume that it is also our soul speaking. So we will swap out the word I for the word the soul. So when we do that, the verse transforms into, "In that day you will know that the soul am in my Father, and you in the soul, and the soul is in you." So secondarily, what we then do is we're going to change the word Father for God, just to keep it simple. So in that case, the verse reads, "In that day you will know that the soul am in God, and you in the soul, and the soul in you." And then, for the sake of readability, we are going to change the verbs just to agree with the change that we put in for the soul. And we're also going to change the pronouns to have them agree. So when we do that, the verse reads, "In that day you will know that your soul is in God, and you in your soul, and your soul in you." So a verse that originally read, "In that day you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you," transforms to read, "In that day you will know that your soul is in God, and you in your soul, and your soul in you." Let's look at another section of text to see how this changes the meaning of Jesus' words. The section that we're going to be reading is John 12:44 through 50. So let's first look at the encoded message. Jesus then cried out and said, "The one believing in me does not believe in me, but in the one having sent me. The one who beholds me beholds the one having sent me. I have come into the world as a light, that everyone believing in me might not abide in the darkness. And if anyone hears my words and does not keep them, I do not judge him. Indeed, I have not come so that I might judge the world, but that I might save the world. The one who rejected me and does not receive my words is the one who judged him. It is the word that I spoke that will judge him in the last day. For I spoke not of myself, but the Father himself who sent me gave me a commandment, that I should say and that I should speak. And I know that his commandment is eternal life. Therefore, what I speak as the Father has told me, so I speak." So when we decode this with the method that we just went over, it opens up a new meaning. Let's read the decoded version of this particular section. Again, the section is John 12:44 through 50. "Then Jesus cried out and said, 'The one believing in their soul does not believe in their soul, but in the one having sent the soul. The one who beholds their soul beholds the one having sent their soul. The soul has come into the world as a light, that everyone believing in their soul might not abide in the darkness. And if anyone hears the words of their soul and does not keep them, the soul does not judge him. Indeed, the soul did not come so that it might judge the world, but that it might save the world. The one who rejected their soul and did not receive the words of their soul is the one who judged him. It is the word that the soul spoke that will judge him in the last day. For the soul spoke not from itself, but from God himself, who sent the soul, gave it a commandment, what the soul should say and what it should speak. And so the soul knows that his commandment is eternal life. Therefore, what the soul speaks, as God has told it, so the soul speaks. So you can see what was before a relatively difficult text to understand. When we substitute in the soul, suddenly it becomes a lot easier to understand. So we will be using the decoded text in coming videos to understand the entire book of John and to understand what the entire book contains using this decoded message. And the message is relatively simple, that we have a soul, that our soul is in God, and that we can trust the messages that our soul tells us. We will speak in detail about this in coming videos. I hope that you are able to receive and find this information useful. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe. It really helps us. And if this touched you, share it with a friend. Let's get this information out to everyone. Have an amazing day. I love you all. See you guys in the next video.